Somewhere around midnight on your 20th birthday, you stop being a teenager forever. No ceremony marks it. No alarm goes off. You just wake up the next morning and the word teenager no longer applies to you. Quietly, permanently, for the rest of your life. You probably think turning 20 is a small milestone, a rounded number, nothing like the drama of 18 or the freedom of 21. But the real answer is far stranger. 20 is the moment your brain, your identity, and your entire sense of time begin operating by a new set of rules, and almost nobody explains what those rules actually are. Here's what nobody tells you. The word teenager carries an entire psychological framework with it. Being a teenager comes with built-in permission. Mistakes get filed under growing pains. Confusion gets filed under normal development. The moment you turn 20, that framework quietly disappears, even though nothing about your brain changed overnight. Psychologist Jeffrey Arnett, the researcher who named the developmental stage called emerging adulthood, found that the 20s function as their own distinct period, no longer covered by the forgiving lens applied to teenagers, but not yet matched by the stability assumed of full adults. Arnett's interviews with young adults revealed a common thread. People in their 20s consistently reported feeling judged by adult standards while still going through what is, biologically, an unfinished stage of development. Think about that for a second. You are held to adult expectations the day after you turn 20, while your brain is still years away from finishing the very systems that adulthood requires. But something more specific happens here, something that goes beyond a change in label. Neuroscientist Beatriz Luna has spent decades studying how the brain's cognitive control systems mature through the 20s. Her research using brain imaging found that certain networks responsible for weighing long-term consequences, resisting short-term temptation, and integrating emotion with logic continue refining themselves well past 20, often into the mid-20s. Crucially, her work showed something counterintuitive. The 20s are not simply the tail end of adolescence. They represent a unique developmental window where the brain is unusually good at learning complex, real-world skills, precisely because its wiring is still flexible enough to adapt, but structured enough to apply what it learns. This means your 20s are not a waiting room before real life starts. They are one of the most formative decades your brain will ever experience, quietly shaping habits, instincts, and default reactions that tend to stick for the rest of your life. There is a third piece to this puzzle, and it explains something almost everyone in their 20s feels, but rarely names out loud. Sociologists studying life course development have long noted a phenomenon sometimes called the social clock, the informal, culturally enforced timeline for major life milestones. Psychologist Bernice Neugarten, one of the pioneers of lifespan developmental psychology, demonstrated decades ago that people carry an internalized sense of being on time or off time for events like finishing school, starting a career, or forming long-term relationships. Turning 20 activates that internal clock in a way 18 and 19 rarely do. Suddenly, the comparisons start. Suddenly, the question shifts from who am I to am I behind. That pressure is not irrational. It is a deeply human response to a social structure that has existed in some form for a very long time. But here is the twist almost nobody expects. The social clock most people compare themselves against today is far more rigid and far more recent than most people realize. For most of human history, there was no single 20s shaped timeline dictating when someone should have their career figured out or their relationships settled. Anthropological research on small-scale and pre-industrial societies shows that adult milestones were often distributed across a much wider range of ages, tied to community needs, seasonal cycles, and family circumstances rather than a fixed number on a calendar. The rigid 22 to 29 timeline many people feel crushed by is largely a product of modern industrial and post-industrial life, an artifact of standardized schooling, career ladders, and delayed milestones like marriage and home ownership, not some ancient biological deadline. In other words, the anxious voice whispering that you should already have it figured out by now is not an ancient survival instinct. It is a remarkably modern invention, barely a century old, mistaken for an eternal truth. So what actually happens the moment you turn 20? The forgiving label of teenager disappears overnight, even though your brain's most important systems are still under construction. Your neural architecture enters one